One other topic we want to get to is this clash over which party has been more steadfast in its support for Ukraine. And this all played out in the House again today.
Conservatives demanded that the government provide lethal weapons before Putin's invasion when they most needed them. He said no. When conservatives kicked Putin out of the G8, made it the G7, he said no. That's not there for Ukrainians. We will stand for Ukrainians and for Canadians.
When it came time to support military aid to Ukraine, they voted against. When it came to the Canada-Ukraine free trade agreement, twice they voted against. While the Conservative leader is busy taking talking points from Fox News and Donald Trump, on this side of the House, we support Ukraine!
Okay, so the Conservatives say their votes that the Prime Minister just listed off are about the carbon tax and not about their support for Ukraine. But how are Canadians going to see this? We're going to talk about that. And Sherelle, I want to go start with you on this. The Liberals think they have found something here, right? In the clause-by-clause vote in the filibuster, the Conservatives voted against Operation Unifier. They voted against the free trade agreement. They say it's all for different reasons, but it's galvanized and energized the Liberals and given them a sharp, pointy stick to aim at the Conservatives.
Yeah, I mean, just look at that clip. Everybody was real fired up. Like, call and response, they were living their best lives in the opportunity to, really needle at the Conservatives on this. And that's something that we haven't really seen in terms of political enthusiasm from this party in quite some time. And it will be difficult for the Conservatives to circle the square in the public forum. Yes, they can say over and over again, okay, when we voted against it, it was because it was a confidence motion. We're saying we don't have confidence in the government, and they can repeat that ad nauseum. But when people look at the votes and say, but you voted against.
There's video. There's roll call video.
Yeah,
right?
But you voted against it. How do you circle that square? It's harder to put across. Ultimately, this trade deal is a symbol, and it would have been an easy symbol to back, and they chose not to do it. So I don't know how they move forward on this, aside from just continuing to say, well, that's not what we meant, but we really do support Ukraine because we had the original deal, and when we're government, we're going to make an even better trade deal. But this is the deal that Ukraine wants.
Right.
So how do you say you know better than Ukraine? Again, it's a hard message to get across.
Dan, I haven't seen your party that happy since, I don't know, election night 2015. It's been a while. But, they do, after, let's face it, a pretty rough year, feel like they've got something here. How do you think this plays politically?
They certainly have something. I mean, it cannot be denied. I think all of your viewers, David, would be well familiar with the adage that if in politics you're explaining, you're losing. I think if Pierre Poilievre's continue to explain why he's decided not to vote in favor of support for Ukraine, he's certainly losing. Like, this is a topic where the more and more he's put in a box where he looks like an import of MAGA-style Republican politics into Canada, with the same shenanigans happening at Congress and the Republicans refusing to vote in support of Ukraine there, I think we're going to see him continuing to slide in the polls in the way that we saw in some Abacus data that was released today.
Yes, the Abacus poll has the Conservatives down 5 points, the Liberals up 4 points. It is still a Conservative point lead, so they've slid to a double-digit lead. So, it is a change, Jordan, and it does coincide with a lot of these issues sort of moving more prominently into the political debate. But like we had Alexandra Hichi from the Ukrainian Canadian Congress on last night, and she's very worried about these votes as being the thin edge of the wedge of undermining the consensus in this country on Ukraine.
Yeah, I think she has every right to be. I mean, we've really seen up until the last month, the support across party lines has been quite ironclad. This is the first real break in it. And I think that we were on, a couple of weeks ago discussing the initial vote about whether this was a one-time trial balloon on the part of the Conservatives, but this is clearly not. They are really winking to a very fringe part of their own base, I think, on this issue. And it absolutely risks, just as Dan was talking about, tying them to the MAGA-style Republican Republican politics that we're seeing in the United States. And I think that for Poilievre, this is an example of the type of issue where the juice is likely not worth the squeeze. Yes, maybe there's a point about the carbon tax buried in there somewhere, but that's not really what's floating to the top on this. And so for him, there's a real risk that this type of an issue is an overreach and a bit of an indulgence that can actually paint him as a bit more extreme than maybe he needs to be to hold together the vote coalition he requires.
Tim, how do you see it?
Well, I have to laugh at the Liberals now. They're like the kid that had sand kicked on them all summer, suddenly went to the gym, lifted some weights, and now ready to throttle the bully. And who could blame them in this circumstance? I would say a few things around this, David. I don't disagree with Dan. I think there is a little bit of an opportunity here for the Liberals, so why wouldn't they seize it? The Conservatives have been consistent that, yes, they were voting against the carbon tax as they saw it. However, they didn't anticipate, I don't think, that the blowback and the degree at which their political opponents, the Liberals, would seize all of this. I think in the maturation of Pierre Poilievre as a political leader, these are the things he's going to have to watch out for. I mean, there's a textbook play here that he could borrow from the Premier of Ontario, who seems to get away with saying sorry when he makes mistakes. But that would be an opportunity, right? Yeah. We're past that now. I think the clock is Pierre and the Conservatives are no doubt hoping the clock ticks out on Friday and this is gone. And they can say to some of their own that, look, you know, wherever we see those two evil words, carbon and tax, we'll fight, and we'll fight. But they already have that vote. In that abacus data, our data that you're talking about, I mean, David Coletto, our pollster, is of the view that this particular issue and the filibuster are the two things that have maybe soured some people who aren't part of that Conservative core, who were parked with the Conservatives on Pierre. The one thing Pierre Poilievre is he's wise. He will go back and look at this and either learn or not. I mean, that's how these things work politically.
It's interesting, though, Sherelle, like when Pierre Poilievre wants you to know something is important, he tweets about it, right? And like there's endless carbon tax and affordability and housing tweets and videos. I did a search on this today. There are 4 tweets in the year 2023 about Ukraine, 3 in English and 1 a French translation of that. So his party has voted against Ukraine motions as much or more as he's tweeted about it in the past year. And I just wonder, what does that tell us? Because we know they want a lot of the People's Party of Canada voters back in their Is that part of what is going on here? Like Jordan was saying, like playing to a different part of his base? What do we think the strategy is behind this?
I'm not sure what the strategy is, and I don't know if they know what the strategy is. So maybe that's why they're trying to keep quiet in those arenas like social media, because they haven't quite figured out, if they put it out on social media, they're going to get those responses from the people who are, parked with, or have traditionally in the past couple of years been parked with, the PPC, who is very much anti anything to do with outside of Canada's borders.
Very isolationist.
Yeah, very isolationist. So do you want to publicly be seen courting those votes and those voices, especially when they do very quickly devolve into, some terrible xenophobic things? Like, do you want that on your channels? I don't know. I would think not. But at the same time, they haven't come out with a coherent. They can keep saying we stand Ukraine,
right,
but they have not come out with a coherent strategy, and that makes me think that because everything is so calculated that he doesn't actually have one.
Well, or that's the I don't know. Tim, does your data suggest anything on this, on like how this plays? Like, is there fertile ground for being quiet on this topic? I don't know.
Well, I think there's more fertile ground for demonstrating a consistency of leadership and doing something in this case that's a little bit more practical, not always tilting at the windmill, even though that's fun to do for you and you've done it and you've already got that ground.
Right. Dan, it's interesting, though. We did see people like James Bazan, who is a vocal and staunch supporter. I almost said critic. I didn't. A supporter of Ukraine. It has a large Ukrainian constituency, and obviously heritage there. What kind of a position do you think this creates for, conservative MPs with that particular heritage and with a large Ukrainian constituency to have this as part of the conversation?
I think a lot of conservatives across the country are very concerned about the stance that's been taken by the leader, and certainly the way it's being played out in the media and in conversations like this. It appears as though conservatives no longer stand with Ukraine, or no longer hold the same steadfast positions in foreign affairs about confronting aggression from Vladimir Putin and Russia that they have in the past. And I imagine the conversations they're having at caucus are as fraught as the ones that we talked about earlier in the ceasefire. I meant that comment earlier. I think it would be impressive to see some conservative MPs that hold such strong and firm support for Ukraine, hold such strong positions on confronting global aggression that they have in the past, come out and say that and speak up on this issue. I know that they're going to say it's the carbon tax. That to me has always seemed like a bit of a reach, let's call it, to a way of explaining why they were voting against this. As Jordan said earlier, I think this has a lot more to do with the political calculus of appealing to a fringe of their base that, because of conspiracy theories and the way that they proliferate now, believe that the West should not support Ukraine, that we should doubt it in the way that Donald Trump has expressed in the past. So I think that the real challenge for Pierre here isn't going to be holding his caucus together, frankly. It's that they've been taken off message. They've had a very successful year in talking about affordability and talking about their plans to deal with housing. They've been performing very well in the polls because of that clarity, because of that discipline. This issue has thrown them completely off of that. And I think that's why we're seeing some softening in the polls and softening support for the Conservatives.
Okay, gang, good conversation. We got to leave it there, though, because we're out of time. I want to thank you all, Sherelle Leveland, Jordan Leiknitz, Tim Powers, and Dan Moulton.